Channel quarters, all hands man your battle stations.
Broadcasting live on WNN 1470 AM, 95.3 FM, iHeartRadio, and the World Wide Web. This is Make America Think Again with your Google Blacklisted host, Tom Trento.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger. No, Will Robinson. Danger.
Good morning, everyone. Here we are. It's Thursday already, December 10th. And we are on the Trento Hour, and I'm here with our great host, Tom Trento. I'm Suzi Gold. We're on WNN 1470 AM, and you can also tune in on FM too, 96.9 FM, 95.3 FM. We're also on iHeartRadio. If you log into theunitedwest.org, you scroll down a little bit and you can see our videos there as well. And you can look at former shows so you can catch up, as we have shows every day, Monday through Friday from 9 to 10 a.m. So our mission is to make America think again, and that's our subject matter. We also have all eyes on Georgia because we know that there's a senatorial runoff race that is so key to Georgia and so key to our country, because we need to make sure that we have a balance of power with the presidency, with the House, and then to ensure that we do have a Republican Senate. So that's where the balance of power within our politics and within our government lie, so that we can have, there's various viewpoints. So we want to make sure we balance those viewpoints. So we do have a lot of conversations on this show about the two candidates that we're supporting, and that is David Loeffler and Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, who are it's a Republican runoff. So, and there are two Marxists that they're running against, and that is Ossoff and Warnock. So we will continue our conversation. We also have two great guests coming on today. We have Jenny Beth Martin, who's the co-founder and national coordinator of the Tea Party Patriots. We also have Barry Shaw, who we've had on last week. So welcome, everybody.
Hey,
welcome to the show.
Can we forget about all that talk about how cold it is outside?
And it is cold. This morning
freezing.
I got up, I think it was 50. Right now in 50. Here, it's 64 degrees. That's in the studio.
I actually put on a sweater this morning, socks and shoes and the jeans and everything, you know.
Last night I took out my boots.
I know. God,
I had my boots that went up to my knees. Actually, I was kind of hot with all that stuff.
Yeah.
I had a layer. I had two sweaters and a jacket.
How do people do this stuff?
Well, I'm too used to Florida. That's beautiful. It's refreshing. So good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm enjoying the show, you know. It's great.
Good
I just
morning.
found just sent you a video, Mark, of course, at the last minute here.
Great. No, don't get to me beforehand.
Look at what he does to
Mary, who's not with us today. And for those of you who follow the show, many do, we follow Brian Craig and Steve Kane, longest running talk show in Western civilization in Florida from 1977. They're on from 6 to 9, do a great job. We follow them and they deliver a beautiful audience to us. And then we take that audience and help them understand what's going on in the world. And those guys do a great job. But we have a little different deal here. We have sort of an ensemble. Yeah. You know what an ensemble is?
An ensemble, a little of this and a little of that.
We have Mark over there in the control room, and you over here, co-host. Mary, typically up north. She's been redeployed to Georgia because she lives in Georgia. She's focusing on Georgia. And then we have a bunch of our friends and everyone else texting and all. So we have a lot of moving dynamics here. But I just got a little earlier an email from Mary from Chris Kassler, who's now working with us for our Georgia project. He's an editor, producer out of Orlando. He just made a phenomenal 2-minute video on is Reverend RAPHAEL Warnock, or what do you call him?
Warlock. That's a witch.
That's a male
witch.
Male
witch. Yeah. But that's a good way to remember.
Kinda
so
works.
When people go into the voting booth, they'll remember. Say with that. But you know, but it's a good way to remember. So when you go in and you know those are the people you do not want to vote for.
Well, somebody should write a little kind of parody, I don't know, fairy tale about a wicked witch.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Stacey Stacey
Abrams.
Abrams.
That'd be good.
That's a Jewish last name, isn't it, Abrams?
It does sound like a Jew, but she's
I
not
don't think
Jewish.
so, no. Stacey Abrams and
Well, her middle name's Isaac.
and what?
Her middle name's Isaac.
Isaac. Okay. And she hand selected Warnock. So if a witch selects a warlock, there it fits, doesn't it? And we will have that video to you. We're producing a fairy tale video about a wicked witch selecting two little servants, John Ossoff and RAPHAEL Warnock. But we're going to show this in a little bit. We'll feature it. This will be the premiere on our show here of great job that Chris, you ready to show it? Well, it's also, before we show it, we got Jenny coming on in a few minutes.
In about 5 minutes.
Let's do a minute or two on the first day of.
Tonight is the
Hanukkah.
first night of Hanukkah. You know, some people can't pronounce the and some people say, well, how do you spell it within it? Sometimes it's an H, sometimes it's CH. That's because it's a Hebrew word. It's not an English
Is it
word.
one of those fake Hebrew? Is it one of those fake?
But it's Hanukkah.
Is it one of those fake Yiddish Hebrew words, or is it? Real
It's a Hebrew
It's a real
word. It
Hebrew
actually
word.
means dedication because it was
Dedication.
the rededication of the temple. So, you know, it's interesting because history repeats itself, right? All the time. We say that's why we need to learn about history because if you don't learn from it, you repeat it. But the Greeks were in control of Israel and they wanted the Jewish people to abide by their beliefs and their customs, and they didn't want them to believe in God. And then there was a small band of Jewish people led by Judah Maccabee, and they fought off with limited equipment, limited tools, limited warfare. They won against one of the greatest armies in the world. And then, so they beat the Greeks, and then they were able to abide by what they believed, which is the Jewish values, Jewish beliefs, and a belief in God. So, so that's where the miracle of Hanukkah is, that a small band could overcome this tremendous army. And then they rededicated the temple. And when they went in the temple, the oil was only supposed to last 1 day, and miraculously, the oil lasted for 8 days. And hence, that's why we celebrate. We light candles and add a candle every night.
8 candles and
8
one
candles,
lighting,
right? And it actually, you know what? It's really not a time like people give gifts, right? It really isn't a time for gifts.
Well, I got a story.
became
I got a story behind that. When I was young, I had a Jewish friend, and I go, "Wow, you get like 8 days of Christmas? That's so cool, right?" And I was like, and then I go, "Hey, yeah, I guess everybody goes, well, no, I get like a pencil." and then this little spinny toppy thingy, and then a couple other little things, but no, I don't get nothing.
Yeah. No, because it really became giving gifts because of Christmas, right? And also I gave to my kids because you want them to be excited about lighting the candles. So I would give a little something, not big gifts. And so, you know, you want them to be eager to light the candles. So, but really it's guilt. That's really the custom, is to give money. Why do you think that is? Why do we give money? Is money, and there's chocolate coins, is because of the Judeo-Christian belief that we should give charity, right? So it's to teach the children, you know, give charity. So that's where the guilt comes from.
Okay.
But you should, on today's the first day.
Tonight's the first night.
Out there, whether you're Jewish or not, you should go look up the story behind Hanukkah. The Greeks coming in and slaughtering a pig on the altar in the Second Temple. I mean, you can't get any worse than that. And the father Matthias got his sons, and Judah was one of the sons, and he said, "All right, let's go, do or die." And it was a big fight. I mean, it was a war, fighting war, dead people. In fact, there were Jews who were leaning toward the Greeks, wanted the culture of the Greeks and all of this, fighting against the Torah observant Jews. So there was like a civil war going on there too. So fascinating story. And we may be getting into those days here with the hard left and their administrative and dictatorial control, and those of us who just want to live and worship freely.
That's right. And we want to stand up for our values and make sure. That means that when we talk about, let's bring it back to Georgia, we talk about Loeffler and Purdue, they are not for abortion. They are not for defunding the police. They are not for all these things that the Marxists want to do, take away from us. And, you know, God willing, one day I want to see prayer back in schools, you know,
if this clown gets in, cue the clown. If this clown gets in, Ain't gonna be prayer, and he's a minister. Ain't gonna be prayer in a school, and our lives are gonna be very, very difficult if RAPHAEL Warnock. You got me. Calling
Warlock.
Warnock. Becomes the senator on January 5th. Take a look at this, ladies and gentlemen. And for those of you on the radio, listen carefully. You'll follow.
Is Raphael Warnock really a radical? Just how radical is he? Raphael Warnock is a disciple of James Cone, a professor at Union Theological Seminary. Warnock said,
while I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, so I spent my with James Cone.
Warnock called Cone his mentor and a prophet and a powerful voice of high speaking words from God. Cone believed that
whites had turned Jesus' message into a gospel of white supremacy.
So Cone responded by turning Jesus' message into a gospel of black supremacy.
The gospel of Jesus is God's word of liberation to the black poor.
Cone taught Warnock, if God is not for us and against white people, then he is a murderer and we had better kill him. In 1969, James Cone wrote Black Power and Black Theology, in which he embraced racial Marxism, calling it Black Liberation Theology, in which blacks must rise up and destroy the white oppressors. He said, Black theology will accept only the love of God, which participates in the destruction of the white enemy. All white men are responsible for white oppression. In this, what we need is the divine love as expressed in black power, which is the power of black people to destroy their oppressors here and now by any means at their disposal. Warnock learned his lessons well. If you are white, Warnock needs you to ask God's forgiveness.
No matter what happens next month, more than a third of the nation that would go along with this is reason to be afraid. America needs to repent for its worship of whiteness on full display.
He said that. He said this in 2015. America needs to repent of its worship of whiteness. Jesus never said that, but Warnock wants you to think that he did. Black liberation theology is the black equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan. Raphael Warnock, a wolf in sheep's clothing. How can anyone of any color vote for him?
Wow.
That's right. How can they?
Good job.
How can they? And we're making sure our listeners are aware, not that tell your friends from Georgia not to vote for Warnock for sure.
Yeah, what we're doing, folks, at 9:17 in the morning a.m., we're in Florida. Cool little chilly Florida today. But what we're doing is taking our campaign that we ran for about 2 years out of this office right here. We coordinated with about 10, 15 other organizations and it like multi-level marketing and went downstream from there. And we used the radio station to communicate a message. We used a billboard campaign. We used on-the-ground activity, rallies, Willie G, Christian on a Mission, Sue Trombino, Women Impacting the Nation, the Haze's, I mean, everywhere, our whole team. Patino down in South Florida, Miami, a Cuban element there. And we just tried to mobilize the people who held to the Judeo-Christian belief system. Because if you compare both parties, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, it's very simple. And this is not hard to do. You take the Judeo-Christian principles as articulated in the commandments and the principles anywhere, and you look at the U.S. Constitution and you see an overlap. Oh, why would you see an overlap? Because that's where they got all of this stuff from. They said, how do we build a country? Did we just throw dice and figure out stuff? Well, we got these books that have been pretty good for years. So I would take a look at that. So they looked at the scriptures, they looked at English common law, they looked at the Greeks who had very good ideas about forming governments, they looked at the Romans, and they took the best of all of that and founded it upon the principles of the scriptures. And they said, this actually could work. And it has for 244 years. And now some people are saying, you know what, there's another book from the 1850s This guy saw the abuses
Yeah.
of the economy and of people with money, of the bourgeoisie, the rich people, and the proletariat, the workers class. You know, there's you can't have two classes. This guy's book is better than that God book over there. Let's rewrite our country's principles according to this book by Karl Marx. And then James Cone comes along in the 60s. You just heard that in the video. Black radical. He says, you know what? I'm going to take a new look at that New Testament book, because Jesus was opposed to white people, and he really wanted economic freedom, not spiritual freedom. And so there you have this cultural battle. We laid out our big idea at the beginning of the week.
Right.
Can an ideological attack be more devastating, more destructive to a country than a physical attack, a philosophical attack versus a physical? It's a rhetorical question. Of course it can. And we're watching it in play. That's why Georgia is so critical to get these two people elected to be that firewall from the Marxists having full sway at doing whatever they want to in this country. It's crazy.
And just to complete the circle here on the whole James Cone thing, you can come out and you find out James Cone influenced a whole bunch of people, including Jeremiah Wright, who you remember, God G America, and also RAPHAEL Warnock. And so much so, I'm just going to play a couple seconds of this, but watch this and let you know how Warlock idolized James Cone. He spoke at his eulogy. Okay, James Cone's eulogy. Just listen to this for a couple seconds.
James Cone is the best classroom teacher I ever had. Started reading James Cone in high school. I didn't know that I would be his student. Read everything he wrote. I learned so much from him about how to think, how to interrogate and unmask. I shared a platform with him at Duke University 3 years ago. We were both invited. And while we were there, he leaned over to me and said, "Raphael, when the time comes, you're doing my eulogy." Dr. Cone roared. Not with a deep booming voice, but with that voice we will miss so much, as he challenged his students. "Raphael, you got to apply yourself." You could hear him speaking.
I'm trying to get.
And by sheer force of will, he spurred a tectonic shift in the whole discourse of theological education.
That's true.
Say what you will, you can't talk about what has happened in the last 50 years in theological education, or about all of the people of color and women and gay sisters and brothers doing this academic work, without reference to Dr. James Cone. It's hardly an overstatement to say that everything prior to him is BC, before Cone. So many of us were taught by him.
Let me put this in.
And if you went to seminary and you weren't taught by him, there's a good chance that you were taught by somebody who was taught by somebody who was taught by him. That's why we used to call him the Lord.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, huh?
Yeah. He's not just a follower of Cone. He's a worshiper of
He's
Cone.
a disciple of
disciple of Cone. I mean, I just want to put a stamp on that, because
Even just say BC. I mean, that's like, here he is, a leader, a spiritual leader.
He's cute with words, and call him the Lord and all that.
Yeah,
that's what makes these guys dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
When they're fancy and cute with their orators.
Right.
And Sharpton's an orator, and Jesse Jackson. He's in that same mold. He's only in his mid 40s. Raphael Warnock. But here's the problem. And you gotta, for everybody listening, 9:24 in the morning here, 9:24 in the morning. Tom Trento, your host. Suzi Gold on my left.
Happy to be
You're
here.
the leftist here.
Yeah.
J Mark over there,
I'm
on
the right, far
And
right.
we have a guest.
Oh,
We have a guest in
there.
the studio.
Who's kind of in the middle.
A live guest.
Doesn't know where she wants to go with it.
Yeah. And we're missing our Mary, but others are around. To lay out some more information. And we're going to be doing a lot of this both on our Florida show and our Atlanta show that broadcasts out of Atlanta on Saturdays. Why are we looking at some obscure little teacher guy, James Cone from the 60s? Well, James Cone, like Karl Marx. Why are we looking at Karl Marx? Because his belief system is being adopted on the university campuses, has been for the past 20, 30 years, but now it's being implemented. It's being implemented not only in culture, in theater and arts, all of that, but now politically. We have the Democrat Socialists of America caucus in the United States Congress. These are people who are doctrinaire Marxists. So what does that mean? Is that good or bad for a country? Well, here we have an election coming up in 27 days, January 5th. And I'm going to bring all this together. It's very, very, very dangerous. So we have Karl Marx sitting out there with his views. Then we have James Cone, who comes along, takes the Marxist views and puts them in a black freedom expression and says the blacks are being suppressed by the country, the slavery's still here, all of that stuff that people would like to hear so they can rebel. And not only this, the country owes you money, reparations. This was big in the 60s. And it kind of died out as the 70s, 80s, 90s. People start working, and it died out a lot with Donald Trump because the black community was very highly employed, and people have jobs. They don't want to be philosophers. They want to put money on the table. Well, it's through the George Floyd thing, the pandemic. I mean, on a dime, this thing switched. And now we're back looking at a Marxist philosophy through the black community as articulated by their dominant teacher, James Cone, going into somebody who's running for Congress right now, who wrote a book. You talk about the eulogy for James Cone that RAPHAEL Warnock did. He also did a eulogy for, guess whom else? Take a wild guess. Whom else he did a eulogy for?
Fidel.
Fidel Castro.
Really?
He spoke at Fidel Castro's death at his
funeral. Yeah,
he did a memorial service for Fidel Castro, and I found the video yesterday. We're doing it. We're going to put something together on this. He basically says that Fidel was a complicated person. Let's not jump too quickly.
Complicated. Oh, that's a nice soft word for a dictator.
This is a guy that got almost 50% of the vote in Georgia on November 3rd. That's why there's a runoff between him and the Christian Kelly Loeffler, the woman. This is a guy who spoke in a memorial service for Fidel Castro. Why would he do that? Well, in 1995, the church that he was a youth pastor at, Abyssinian Church in Harlem, welcomed Castro when Castro was at the United Nations. And the law for Castro in 1995 was you can be at the United Nations, you can't go more than 25 miles any place around you can't travel around the United States. You're a crazy dictator. And the Abyssinian Church said,
I have the video.
We're less than 25 miles. While we're waiting for when Barry comes on here. We're less than 25 miles. Come on here. So they gave the platform while he, RAPHAEL Warnock, was a youth pastor. They gave the platform to Castro. He wowed the crowds. I just played 10 seconds of it.
Ready?
Go ahead.
Who would you rather have to come to Harlem? Fidel or Giuliani?
Fidel or Giuliani, 1995. So they go on and start chanting Fidel. Yeah. Now jump ahead to Fidel dies. Warnock does a memorial service where he says he was a very complicated, complex person. And I'm watching this going, like you just did. What? Then I go, okay, how's he going to get out of this? And then he's very, very good. Then they talk about Fidel having political prisoners. Well, let me tell you right here, brothers and sisters. See these men up here? These are political prisoners. He's talking to black guys who got arrested for different things. Every country's got political prisoners, and it's in this the requirement of a government to free them. He freed, he let people go. We need to free. He made a moral equivalence between the political prisoners that Castro took and the political prisoners that the police arrested for dealing in drugs and everything. Mm-hmm. I said, you got it. This thing is devastating.
It is.
So we're gonna bring that out. We're gonna expose it. And the key, hang on, Mark. The key is that this guy could be the next senator from the state of Georgia. This is why we're so dedicated to working. Why we need a little bit of gelt. Is it gelt?
Yeah,
gelt?
We need a lot of gelt. Yeah, log into theunitedwest.org. Click on that donate button. We need to keep our lights on. We need to pay our bills so that we can. The most important thing is to educate people because they don't know. This guy has a microphone and he talks a fancy talk, and he dances the tune. Right. But he is a Marxist. Look at what he would do and how he would vote to fundamentally change America. And that's what a Senate that would be largely Democrat, what they would do is they would certainly, that was a phrase that Obama used, but he meant it. Right. And this is continuing. This is a Marxist mentality. And so we need to continue to educate people so that they vote intelligently, vote wisely. And that's why behind me is MATA, to make America think again. And a lot of people don't know these things. They really don't. They say, okay, we're going to elect somebody and they're going to do their job. They don't realize how doing their job can change our lives every day, can change not just Georgia in this case, but can change the country. Because if these two Marxists get in those positions, the senatorial positions, they will fundamentally change America and change our way of life. So it's very important to be educated, know what they stand for.
And I just want to clear up one thing: is James Cone in 1984 went down and hung out with Castro. Took him all over the island, toured him with the island with Jesse Jackson, and the Abyssinian church leaders were all there. Now, you can't tie any more directly closely to Castro.
We'll put a link analysis together.
And he's a devout, idolizing follower of James Cone. It's just crazy.
I just sent you his comments 2 days after Castro died. See if you can cue that up.
I'm wondering if there's something wrong with the login.
Could be. Who knows? But that's okay. We can use. I got a lot of stuff.
Okay.
No Barry.
I'm sorry, and not to be rude, but we do have guests that are coming on that are waiting. So I want to make sure that nobody's contacting me. I think, you know what? I think sometimes there's some issues with the internet. There's some issues. Look at how you're censored everywhere. And we don't know if some of our technology is working.
You gotta cut and paste it. You can't just click on it for some reason. In any event, 9:33. Look, I got a ton of stuff. Good. We love our guests. We were waiting for Jenny Beth Martin, head of Tea Party Patriots, an amazing lady. And then Barry Shaw was coming back to do part two. He's in locked down Israel, where if you get your vaccination, you get a green passport and you can buy and sell and go everywhere in Israel. And if you don't, you can't.
No way.
Really?
Oh, you have
where in Israel, if you get your vaccination, this is what's being discussed, then you get a passport that allows you to go anywhere you want in Israel. If you don't get vaccinated, you are not allowed to go to many, many places. A little scary. I don't think that would work here in the United States of America. That's a little scary, but it's a very vulnerable country with 7-8 million people. So can you play that? All right, here's again, with people are driving on, who cares about Warnock? Who cares? Yeah. Here's why we're making this point at 9:35 in the morning. This guy is going to make decisions if he gets elected, and right now it's neck and neck about how much taxes you pay, whether or not you can buy a gun if you want, whether or not your First Amendment, there's a whole variety of freedoms in the First Amendment, from religious freedom to freedom to speak, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition the government. Those are going bye-bye if this guy becomes a senator. He's going to be voting with all the crazies because he's one of the crazies. So what we're talking about now pertains to every single person listening to us today. If you know anybody in Georgia, you got to call them up and tell them to get out and vote against this guy. Or if you could help us financially, we're there on the front lines. We're sending people there. We have people there. We have a radio show that we have to pay for every week there. So we'll do the work. You help us or you go do the work. We're all together for the next 27 days. This is gigantic. Listen to the guy we're talking about, Raphael Warnock, 2 days after Castro dies, eulogizing, memorializing, saying good stuff about Fidel Castro.
We remember Fidel Castro, whose legacy is complex.
Complex.
Don't let anybody tell you a simple story of life. Usually
This is
it's very simple.
2016.
His legacy is complex. Kind of like America's legacy is complex.
Unbelievable. Right there.
How
Boom.
can he compare
Boom.
the two?
A hammer comes down on him right there.
With soft
That's moral equivalence. When you hear the term, you're morally equivocating. That means you're taking the morals of Castro and you're making them equal to the morals of America. And for that, you should not be allowed to run for office. But in America, anybody can run for office.
I'm going to replay this again. I don't know if anybody caught this.
Right.
Okay. That was the shocking point. But you have to look at the effects. This is a pre-planned. This wasn't an off-the-cuff statement. This wasn't just, oh, I'm thinking, oh, yeah.
This was a script that he
This-
wrote.
He's reading his sermon.
No, but it wasn't only scripted. It had soft piano music accompanying the background.
That's true,
And
yeah.
little rim shots every now and then on the drums, little rim shots. So it was all choreographed to give this soft overtone flavor of Fidel Castro.
Like
Now,
hypnosis.
No, that's a very good point.
Listen to it. Yeah, it's choreographed.
Legacy is complex. Don't let anybody tell you a simple story of life. Usually isn't very simple. His legacy is complex.
Soft music.
Kind of like America's legacy is complex.
There's the
There's the
segue
piano.
into, let me take these people and show them why Marxism
While
is
we
good.
focus on
Little bar music.
political prisoners in Cuba,
With a rim shot.
you saw the folks standing here this morning. If some people get slapped on the hand for the same crime and others go to federal prison, then we too have our own political prisons.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Because politics more than the crime, politics of race and
There's
class.
got to be race and class. There's Marxism.
And in that sense, many of us have sisters and brothers who are political prisoners.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Listen.
We're about to pray to a man who was a political prisoner.
All right, we're going to do an expose. We should do a whole show on that. We should do.
All they need to have people in the back go,
Yeah, they start swaying with it. I've been in a lot of black churches. The music's pretty cool, but not when you're worshiping Fidel Castro. Give me
I
a
can't really
break.
think. Okay, hey Tom, let's do a segment on. You talk about Hitler, and I'll do the background accompanying music.
Yeah, the music.
And then Adolf went to the crematorium, and he said, that's what this stuff was. All right, so we got a serious problem.
We have a very
with
serious problem.
Raphael. What you saw that? What was?
Yeah, I mean, here's this. What blows my mind is that you hear his title, that he's a minister, and you think, oh, this guy knows stuff and he's smart and wise and he's going to come from a spiritual or religious perspective. And then he spews this stuff and you're like, wait a minute, and really what he's doing is he's mesmerizing the audience. He's hypnotizing the audience
with piano bar
you
music.
listen to people,
Piano bar
you give
music,
them
yeah.
time, you give them, so-called airtime, or you're listening. They should just get up and walk out. This guy is a fraud.
He's a fraud, but
He's a fraud.
but
And we have our guest.
he's not a fraud.
He's not a fraud. He's the real deal.
Speaking of frauds,
He's the real deal. We had Barry Shaw on about a week ago, and he was really a hit. We got tremendous positive feedback from our listeners, and there was so much to be said. We really needed several hours with Barry Shaw, but we were so happy to be able to get him back on again. He's the Senior Associate for Public Diplomacy at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. He's also authored many books, and he's an all-around great guy and so intelligent and shares so much with us. So welcome. We're so happy to have you, Barry.
Susie, I heard you talking about hypnotizing an audience. I thought you were talking about me. I thought that was part of my introduction.
Yeah, so here we had Warnock on, and here he was eulogizing Fidel Castro, and he, making the comparison between, his complex life and how he ruled or reigned, and compares that with America. Very strange, very, very strange. But we're so happy to have you on, where we could share real information that is accurate. And that's what a lot of our listeners say. A lot that write in, they listen to our show because it's authentic. We vet everybody, and everything is substantiated. So we're so happy to turn it over to you and have a conversation with you.
Okay, you don't mind if I go on a rant like I did last time?
Everybody loved it. Everybody loved it.
Rant away.
Let me get everybody up to speed. You briefed us last time on the team that Joe Barack O'Biden was putting together for Kamala Harris, and you said, "Whoa, this team has some problems." You start identifying those problems to the United States and problems to the Middle East, to Israel, and then we had to leave you. Now we're back, part two. Pick it up and help us understand what's going on there. And I think we're going to talk about the Iranian strike. Somebody hit some bad guy in Iran or something.
I heard about that as well, yes. Okay, well, first of all, let's do a continuation of what I was explaining to you and your view. By the way, quite a number of people watching your show were in contact with me for more updates and information about the future. Hope maybe not. We got to pray. But if it's going to be a Biden administration, the Washington swamp, the people that he has picked are basically, as I pointed out last time, an Obama third term. And I was pointing out, for instance, people like Anthony Blinken in the foreign policy and what it donates for Israel. But I'd like to make another point just to round out this thing before we go on to some other things. I was talking about West Exec advisors, and I recommended some of your viewers go to their Facebook page, their website. And a lot of people did, and this sent them on to me for more information. But I want to point about another very influential advocacy and policy group in Washington called the Foreign Policy for America. They hammer out what they see as U.S. foreign policy and push their proposals to members of Congress and into the White House. And they work in the halls of Congress, pushing their agenda with the Democrat, Never Trump members, and coordinate with big corporations, like we mentioned, West Exec advisors, maintain contact with foreign governments. And they have some very disturbing perspectives on Israel. I'll give you one. Avril Haines, she has just been appointed by Biden as the CIA chief. And she and other members of the Foreign Policy for America Advisory Board, Robert Malley, Ned Price, and Donald Steinberg, signed a public letter earlier this year urging the Democratic Party to adopt a more pro-Palestinian language in its platform. And with the sort of people that I mentioned to you in the last show, this is highly likely to happen. However, your viewers, and particularly your Jewish viewers, those in Jexit and others as well, would be shocked perhaps to learn that Jeremy Ben-Ami, the head of J Street, is one of the 12 board of directors of Foreign Policy for America. Now, for those of you who don't know who J Street is a Jewish group that has one overriding policy, and that's to push for the creation of a Palestinian state. And it doesn't really matter to them whether it's going to be headed by the PLO or Hamas, it seems. But just as long as there's a Palestinian state in 1967 borders, and the Jews of Judea and Samaria, backed by the Israeli Bund, are basically called the sole obstacle to this ambition. Now, we at Israel.
Barry, hang on. Our show now is at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we've inherited a very large audience from the two guys before us. Give our new listeners out there what the 67 borders means. That's, exactly. Throw those words around and put that into context.
67 borders is basically a fiction, but what it is has got nothing to do with Palestinians or anything. It was a demarcation line that when the last battle between Israel and Jordan ended, Israel had reached what's called the 1967 borders. If you adopt the armistice line, that would be the lines between the Israeli army and the Jordanian army when we were forced to stop the war. This was, of course, a war of aggression by Jordan, who invaded Israel with other Arab armies, those from Egypt and from Syria as well, with a view of annihilating the Jewish state. But however, these are not borders. They were never any border between Israel and a supposed Palestine, because there was never any Palestine in the first place. And when in 1967, when this battle ended, there really wasn't even a Palestinian authority at that time as well. So it's solely fictitious. So, the other thing as well that we at Israel Institute of Strategic Studies have produced a literature where we went up onto the so-called 1967 borders and, for instance, went into a small Arab village called Rantis, and we took photographs of what you see from the so-called 1967 lines. And Rantis looks down on Ben Gurion Airport, because it's on the peak of what's called the hills of Shomron, overlooking the valley down below, which is a central coastal belt that you have driven up several times, Tom, as you go between, let's say, Tel Aviv and heading north, for instance. And you can see the photographs we show are basically photographs that you would see if you were a Palestinian terrorist with an RPG, and you were looking down on Ben Gurion Airport, and you can actually physically see the aeroplanes. Now, why is this? And of course, in the background, you can see Tel Aviv as well. In other parts of the 1967 borders, you see the Reading Power Station, and you see the power station near Hadera, and these are major infrastructure facilities that Israel needs for its power. So basically, the notion of, even in any peace agreement, we're going to withdraw 600,000 Israelis, 600,000 Jews from territories that we hold back to 1967 borders is an absolute non-starter. Tom, in your future United West trip to Israel, you must invite us to take you up onto the 1967 borders a couple of places, and you can see it and film it for yourself.
So you're saying it's not a good idea?
Not a good military idea
to give an RPG to a terrorist to put him on top of a hill overlooking an airport? You say that's a bad idea?
Yeah, you can bring down one plane tomorrow. Who's going to fly into Israel?
Yeah, you're such a hater. He's such a hater, Tom. I can't believe he says, All
right, so basically, any organization saying return to the 67 borders is simply saying, all right, you Jews, you're going to commit Jewicide. You're gonna give up your country, and inevitably somebody's gonna kill you.
Right, and from the river to the sea.
Yeah, it's
Get
from the river to the sea.
Exactly.
Mediterranean.
That's exactly the motto that you hear not only from the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, but you hear it on certain campuses as well by the pro-Palestinian movement. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means no Israel, because the river referring to is the River Jordan, which is the river flowing between Jordan and what should have been Israel, if you like, and the rest is called euphemistically also the West Bank. What do they mean by the West Bank? It's the West Bank of the River Jordan. Why do they call it the West Bank? Because they don't want to call it Judea and Samaria, which are the old ancient names of which signify that it was once part of the ancient Jewish state of Israel.
Yep. And you got to come with us. You have to come with us, folks out there. Tom Trento, 9:50 in the morning. We're with Barry Shaw, Suzi Gold here, Mark. You have to come with us. We are going. I believe it's June. We'll get the
exact dates.
The dates out for you. But this is the kind of stuff we do there, so you have an understanding of the geopolitical elements and the geography and all the issues. All right, continue, Barry, with your analysis of the Joe Barack Biden administration.
Well, this FBA section on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, by the way, is a copy-paste directly from J Street literature. It includes tips on how to persuade Congress to be more sympathetic, like I said, with the Palestinians and angry with the Israeli government. And the FBA advised policymakers to learn more about the extremist Israeli NGO B'Tselem. Here in Israel, we have an NGO, a really left-wing NGO, who is in cahoots with any organization abroad who has an anti-Israel agenda, and it takes them to meet into Arab villages and bring out certain people with various complaints and everything. But however, the Simon Wiesenthal Center has called B'Tselem a campaigner against its own country. So you can say that's basically treasonous. But however, the FBA, they published a history of the conflict. As I said, according to them, the conflict began in 1949, which is ridiculous because that was the date of the United Nations character when they had a partition plan and they voted overwhelmingly for the creation of a Jewish state, which was later called Israel. But they conveniently forget to mention the murderous Arab pogroms against the Jews from 1920 to 1939, where every couple of years, the Arabs raided Arab towns and villages and killed Jews between 1920 and 1929. They didn't call themselves Palestinians then, by the way, because they simply want to kill the Jews and belong to a greater Syria, which was at the time of that year. You should read one of my books, for instance, 1917, From Palestine to the Land of Israel, and you get an understanding of the history. There wasn't a Palestinian cause in those days. They reckon the Oslo Accord. You remember the Oslo Accord where Rabin was persuaded, cajoled to come to Bill Clinton's White House and shake hands with Yasser Arafat, right?
Yep. Yeah, sure.
You mean Jews? I mean, Arabs hated Jews before Trump. Is that what you're saying? Oh wow, that's a newsflash.
You could say, well, I want to tell you, you mentioned Trump, but basically Trump was the first time for decades when Arabs actually stopped hating Jews and Israel and started making normalization and peace agreements with us, which is, to quote Trump, on warp speed. You know, we get daily reports of new agreements being signed on all sorts of things between Israel and the UAE. There are already Israelis now vacationing in Abu Dhabi and places like that, Bahrain as well. And there's something really, really positive going on. And I think I mentioned briefly in your last show, when people like Blinken were talking about the Arab Spring, which was actually the Islamic winter. And I mentioned at the time, because thanks to President Trump, we are seeing now the emergence of the true Arab Spring. If Arab Spring means recognition of Israel, respect for the Jews of Israel, and really having normalization agreements.
And
Yeah,
without
absolutely.
a transfer of land.
We got about 2 minutes with you,
There's no such
Barry.
thing as land for peace.
We got about 2 minutes with you, and we'll have you back.
Well, Suzi mentioned something very important, because you mentioned, Suzi, about, without us having to give land. And this is a point I want to make if we've got 2 minutes or more, but this is an important point that Suzi began to touch on. The big difference between a Trump initiative of peace in the Middle East and Biden's foreign policy team going back to the old two-state, dragging what I call the dead camel through the sand. The secret of success of peace in the Middle East is not, first of all, Israel has to withdraw and make peace with the Palestinians, except you make peace with the Arab states. In fact, it was the Arab states that came forward to make peace with Israel, because we have a common enemy, and that's not the Palestinians, that's Iran. But the Palestinians, now the Arab states who are making peace with Israel, see other nuisance. They are the ones who can't tolerate the rejectionism of the Palestinians. They've said the Palestinians are wrong. And the way to peace in the future, any peace, even with the Palestinians, is to put them in the corner, as the Arab states are doing right now, and then forge peace with the Israelis. And the more people that come on and sign that, the more flexible the Palestinians will be, because A, they won't be funded by the American taxpayers, and they won't be funded by the Arab nations either. And they have to have a change of leadership. The pressure has to be on them and not on Israel. And this is something, sadly, that the Biden administration foreign policy team won't do, because they have to try and knock back and destroy any of the successes and the initiatives of Trump. And that will not herald peace. It will herald the opposite.
All right, what you're just talking about is absolutely gigantic. You've laid out, and this is very, very important. We're going to have to leave in a minute, but we gotta have you back, and we have to detail this. We'll get Ronnie Wexler in and some others. Barry just laid out the solution to the problems in the Middle East, with the Arab countries making peace with Israel. And it was moving that way with Trump because there was the concept of strength. Right. Now it's going to be reversed. And not only Jeremy Ben-Ami, J Street, but you're going to have all of the Arabists in the U.S. Congress feeding all of this. The whole dynamics in the White House, the whole dynamic's going to be reversed. And we're going to have flare-ups all over the place. And Iran is going to exploit this. So Joe Biden's going to bring a war to the Middle East.
Well,
I guarantee
the good news
it.
in all this, Tom, at least China likes Israel.
Yeah. China doesn't have their hand in any of these countries or any of these issues to agitate.
If we don't have time, it's a pity, because, I wanted to talk a little bit about your election, but I wanted to do it by prefacing how Barack Obama, President Obama, interfered in Israel's election.
No, he didn't do that.
2015.
That's right.
No, we don't have time because you were late,
If you want
Barry.
to talk about election interference, you have to have me on to talk about Obama interfering in our election in 2015 and the reasons why.
You were supposed to be here at 9:30, 4:30 your time. You were 10 minutes late, Barry.
It's a connection. I'm sorry. Don't
Okay,
mind.
no problem.
We'll
see you.
Darn connections.
We'll bring you back next week because we want to go through that involvement.
I'll reach out to you. We'll pick
really
a day.
out of time, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Suzi. Thank you, Tom.
All right, Barry. Sure.
Great
You take
show.
it easy.
Thank
Good
you
show.
for coming on.
Tomorrow we have who? Real fast? Anybody?
Tomorrow we have the one and only Tom Trento.
Oh, me? Okay, good. I got good stuff tomorrow.
Yeah, we don't have any guests lined up for
I got
tomorrow,
a
but we
lot of
do for
stuff.
next week.
I have a lot of stuff. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.